Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the PropaUgandan podcast with Kalungi. Now before we begin this episode, I just wanted to say that in this episode I mispronounce a few things and I misspell a few things. I mispronounce Ahmaud Arbery's name, who is one of the latest victims of white supremacist killings. He was murdered by three white supremacists, and I unfortunately and very regrettably mispronounced his name in this podcast, so I'm really sorry. I have no excuse for that, so I really apologize for that. And I also misspell my business name. You can see in the back there that I've got a t-shirt company. It says Kalungi, and towards the end I misspell it and I spell it wrong, hence misspelling. So I just want to let you know, look out for that. I correct it at the beginning, but just to let you know, it's spelled Kalungem. So please forgive me for that and enjoy the podcast. Thank you. Okay, welcome to another episode of the PropaUgandan podcast with Kalungi. Today's episode is brought to you by Kalungi, an exciting new t-shirt company created by yours truly. And this actually marks the beginning of this t-shirt company that will go on to be making other clothings, but at the moment we're focusing on t-shirts, and we want to give you, the listeners of the PropaUgandan podcast, an opportunity to be the first customers, the first people to get your hands on these t-shirts. So what you should do is you should go on Instagram and follow Kalungi Clothing, and Kalungi is spelt Kalun for nectar, GEM, clothing, and there you find a link and you'll be able to follow that link and get your hands on a t-shirt. So we got it from extra small all the way to extra large, so don't worry, we've got everyone covered. Speaking of social medias, yes, I do know I just said social medias, it's my own thing, so I want you to also follow my personal social media, my Instagram, king_Kalungi, my Twitter, Kalungi_. The Instagram for this podcast is Propa Podcast, and Propa is spelled PROPA Podcast. And it's the same on the Twitter, and you can find this whole videoed podcast on YouTube if you search the PropaUgandan podcast. And once again, Propa is spelled PropaUgandan podcast. It's just a play on, propaganda, PropaUgandan. So let's get started with the podcast. This is a very interesting episode because on this day, as we record this podcast, there's been a lot of riots and protests that have been going on in the United States of America, as well as the UK and other parts of the world, in particular Germany, in Berlin. And these riots and protests have been in response to the brutal murder of George Floyd, RIP, but also as well as other victims of police brutality and police killings, including Breonna Taylor and many others that have been murdered by the police, as well as rogue so-called vigilantes, some of whom murdered and killed Ahmaud Arbery, who was jogging, I think in Georgia, and he was killed by these group of racists. So this is a sad day to record this podcast, because the world is going through some sort of major change, clearly, but it's going through some difficult turmoil, along with the COVID-19. We've also got this virus that clearly there is no vaccine for. So I just hope that everyone's keeping safe in more ways than one. And I just want to pay my respects to everyone that's been a victim of white supremacy and racist killings. So please do stay safe, and anyone else who's also been a victim of the other virus, coronavirus, I just want to pay my respects, especially all across the world. There's no discrimination with this podcast, although we do focus on Ugandan issues, we do focus on Ugandan identity and Ugandan culture. I think it's important to also take into consideration that what affects one part of the world in this globalized world does affect every part of the world. So there is no such thing as just an isolated incident and we just chill and we sit and we just think, well, it's not happening to me, you know. I do remember a poem that I've read back, I think we all read it if you grew up in the UK. It was called what was it called? It was talking about let me find out because I don't want to mess this up. Let me respect this author and I'm gonna find out right now. I think it's called there we go. It's a poem by a Nigerian poet by the name of Ni Osudare. I think it's Ni, Niyi. If it's Ni, apologies. If it's Ni, then apologies for mispronouncing it. So it's written by Ni Osudare and it's called Not My Business, and it talks about, you know, neighbors who see other neighbors being taken away by the police, by the authorities, and they don't really say anything, and they you know, they're thinking, well, it's not my business, you know. As long as, I think what the famous phrase is, as long as they don't take the yam from my savoring mouth. I'll read a little line from this poem, and remember, this poem does not belong to me. It's written by Ni Osudare, and it goes: they picked a Kenny up one morning, beat him soft like clay, and stuffed him down the belly of a waiting jeep. What business of it? What business of mine is it? So long they don't take the yam from this. Let's go again. So they picked a cunny up one morning, beat him soft like clay, and stuffed him down the belly of a waiting jeep. What business of mine is it? So long they don't take the yam from my savoring mouth. And for me, I'm thinking about that poem, but I'm also thinking about how it relates to the current situation. For anyone who sat there, you know, I myself, I'm guilty of this. So anyone who sat there thinking, well, this has nothing to do with me, you know, as long as they don't take the yam from my savoring mouth, all is good. But actually, what happens in America does affect what happens in other parts of the world. And, you know, I want to just relate it to Uganda, for example. You know, it's no secret that America influences the world in such a major way. From the films, from the culture, the music, we look to America for inspiration. Therefore, you know, things that happen there will make their way onto the continent, you know. So in the same way that hip hop has traveled and made its way to Africa, to parts of the world, you know, whether or not you know, we get into this argument of where the inspiration of hip hop comes from, but the fact that music and film and Hollywood makes its way to the continent, I think it will be the same way that, you know, police brutality will also make its way and be exported in other parts of the world. So therefore, it's very important for us to acknowledge and, you know, keep up to date and, you know, make sure we stand up to these to this white supremacist way of operating, especially in institutions that are meant to protect people. You know, these are institutions that are meant to, you know, protect and serve. You know, it won't be. It's only a matter of time before, you know, other police forces in other parts of the world, in particular Uganda, you know, if they haven't done so already, but they start taking inspiration from that, you know. You also have to take into consideration that sometimes some people are trained, you know, you have police forces or potentially people in the army who were trained in the US. That's where they took their military training from, the US. So, you also find in some cases some police officers were in the army. So don't quote me on this, but I make this point to say that violence begets and breeds more violence. If we try not to put an end to this, it'll just be a cycle forever and ever and ever, whether it's happening in a small town in the States or whether it's happening in Uganda. Violence everywhere is a painful thing, and if we don't try to put an end to that, we will all be affected. It's something that we maybe sometimes people don't really understand, and it's really interesting because I was speaking to a few Ugandans, or I spoke to someone close to me in Uganda, and she wanted to know about this situation. She wanted to know what was going on because they were showing it, little snippets of it on Ugandan TV networks, and she went onto YouTube, but she wasn't really quite understanding what was going on, and that's how easy it is for that news to travel across the globe, and you see the solidarity that people in Germany, people in the UK. I myself didn't go to a to a protest march. I have in the past. I have my reasons for that. I have, in 2016, I went to the Black Lives Matter march that took place around August or July, in response to, I think it was Philando Castile, and there I went to that. And my reasoning behind that was the fact that I just felt like we needed to show our support. We needed to show that we won't stand for this, and we stand with our African American brothers and sisters. So I went there. This time I decided not to go, purely for a few reasons. One of the reasons was, coronavirus. That does have me a bit shook. I'm not gonna lie, it does have me a bit shook, and I was worried that being around so many people, even though lockdowns are being they've made it a bit easy, or they've lessened the measures of the lockdown, even though they're saying it's okay to go outside. I just worry that few weeks or few months down the line, the fact that we were all in such confined spaces, whether or not we're outside, but in such outside close proximity, might come back to bite us in the arse, and I just didn't want to risk that. But also as well, this is, I guess, could be considered controversial, but I just sometimes wonder the effect, or the impact that these kind of marches and protests have in response to bringing about an end to these racist killings, by the police, or by white supremacists. Like I said, in 2016, I went to the march in London, in central London, the Black Lives Matter march in London, and went there to show our solidarity. We made some noise, we disrupted the system for a brief time. But then fast forward 4 years later, and there are more killings, that are leading to more marches and more protests. And then you flash back to the civil rights movement in the 60s, and you see the marches, and you see the riots, or the riots in the 80s, 90s, the riots that come about after police brutalities, after unjustified, a lot of, no murder or violence is justified, but just brutal killings by racists. There's more protests, and I just wonder that, are these protests, are they effective? Do they have an impact? Are we gonna be back protesting in 4 years' time? What else can we do? What else can we do that can have a big, long-lasting impact? That's what I, spent yesterday thinking about. Of course, I got so much respect for everybody that goes out to march and protest. Like I said, I've been there briefly. I've done one, but I've been a part of one. We've been there, in front of the powers that be, central London, next to Whitehall, next to Parliament Square. Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter. But then 4 years later, there's more killings, there's more murders. Black people are still being shot in America brutally by the police or racist white people. And the UK as well. The UK is not innocent. I would even go as far as saying as Uganda's not innocent. So, with these protests, it makes me wonder, makes me question, what impact are they going to have? And is there something else that we can do as well as the protests? Not in place of, but as well as the protests, as well as the marching, the riots. Everyone has their own opinions about that, because of course, for someone to be, crying and saying that, oh, you burnt down my shop and you burnt down the bank, when you can actually get insurance from that, you can replace that, whereas this person's life cannot be replaced. You cry more for the building than you do for the human being. For me, yeah, of course, that doesn't make any sense for anyone to be lamenting the burning down of their bank or their building, their business that can be replaced through insurance, potentially, depending what deal they have, when they should be crying and lamenting the death of an innocent man or woman, so I just do kind of wonder in regards to the protests. I do wonder. And for anyone that's listening to this thinking, hey, what's this got to do with Uganda? Listen, man, I'm a Ugandan male living in the United Kingdom, living in the UK. I am very much affected by this, I guess you could say, lucky to not have had many run-ins with the police. The one experience I remember having was when I was about 15. I was coming back from visiting a girlfriend that I had, and I was going to Bournemouth, I remember, and I was on the train, and I was coming in from Bournemouth, and I was on the train, and I decided, okay, all right, let me treat myself. Let me sit in first class. First class was empty, so I thought, okay, it's empty, so no one's gonna know, right? So I'm sat down, and then the train stops. I see these police. I don't know. There might have been 4 or 5, might have been 3, but there might have been 3 to 5 police officers. They come on. They tell me to come off the train. I agree. It wasn't anything, aggressive or anything, but I agree. And they start searching me, and they tell me, oh, they took me off the train because there was a report of a black male who jumped over the barriers and he fit my description. And I think I asked them, oh, what was the description? Or they told me, they said, oh, 6 foot black male with a gold tooth. Now, bear in mind, I'm 15 years old. I'm 5'7" now, so 15 I was probably 5'5" or 5'4", Didn't have a gold tooth, and how could you even tell you had a gold tooth from CCTV, But this police officer had the audacity to ask me, you wouldn't happen to have a gold tooth, Now, this experience pales in comparison, with what's going on and what other people have gone on that experiences that have been very, very brutal. But it goes to show that there's so much profiling that goes on when you're a young black male. The assumption that you're a criminal, whether or not you fit the description of someone that they're looking for, it doesn't matter. It could be you. The assumption that you are a threat, that in itself is dangerous, because had I resisted, what would have happened? You need 3, 4, 5 officers for a 15-year-old boy? You don't need to take him off a train. Whatever reasons you might have, knowing very well it said the description was 6 foot male, and you know very well that he's on the train, whether or not you didn't want him to be on the train because he was in first class, whatever. You don't know whether I had the ticket or not. But the more of the story is the very fact that black lives are always a threat. Always a threat. It's always like, let's go. Oh, they're gonna be violent. And how that impacts you as a black person growing up is, people have done studies on this. That kind of need to make yourself small, that need to make sure you're not a threat, you're not threatening, to make sure that if you see the police, you got to make sure that you're not doing anything that's going to lead to you getting hurt or killed. So it's like, yeah, this is a horrendous thing that's going on, and you can definitely relate it to this whole story. For those of you that are listening to the PropaUgandan podcast, you can definitely relate it to experiences of growing up as a young Ugandan. You hear stories of, this story actually reminded me of a fellow Ugandan, Daniel Kaluuya. He had a story where he was taken off a bus very aggressively. He sued the police, in fact. Dragged off the bus. Makes me wonder, when I was 15, had I been a bit bigger, maybe I would have been dragged off the train. There's 4 or 5 police officers for a young person. For this police officer, I think his name is Derek Chauvin or Chauvin. For him to have his knee on this man who's been handcuffed, is not resisting. He's got 3 or 4 other police officers, but you've got your knee so precise, knowing what you're doing, hands in pocket, so casual with it. Looking for the right pressure points to end this person's life. For me, that person's not a human being. That's not a human being at all. That's not a human being. We've been dehumanized from a young age. We've been dehumanized. That particular person. I saw a comedian by the name of Nabil Abdul Rashid talked about this. He said part of the reason why a lot of these brutal police killings and brutal killings by white supremacists goes on in the United States, and you'd even say you could relate to his I guess his explanation, you could relate it to other parts of the world, but he asked us to, and I need to look into this, but he said, look at these pictures of the lynchings that went on. Have a look at in the background. You'd find little kids, little 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds smiling. Yeah, they're smiling. Now those kids, when those lynchings were taking place, they're young, they grow up. They have kids. They have kids, So you have generations of people who, either their parents or their grandparents or their great-grandparents, experienced or witnessed rather lynchings. So then they go on and pass on that love, that desire to see black bodies swinging, black bodies bleeding and being brutally, dehumanized. That desire is then passed on through different generations. So the dad, the granddad, the great-granddad tells each child, offspring, about their desire for that. They start to then frame black lives as unimportant, not human, disposable. So they then go off and become police officers, they become doctors, politicians, teachers. They do all these professions that enable them to project their fear for black lives, their disregard for black lives, their desire to see black lives, black bodies killed or strangled or murdered, just their desire to see the end of black lives. So they project that. As a police officer, they see a young black male, they use brute force because their grandparents put that in their brain for years. So this episode has taken a different turn, but I think it's worth talking about it because we're all grown up. A lot of us are grown up in the diaspora, you're grown up in the United States, as a Ugandan. They're not gonna look at you and think, oh no, that's an African, not an African American, that's an African. They don't care. I think it's Amadou Diallo from Guinea. Let me get his name right. Yeah. That's it. Amadou Diallo from Guinea. He was fresh from the continent. Shot by the police. They shot him, I think, 40 plus times. Sorry if I'm wrong with this, but they shot him, I think, in the potentially in the 90s, yeah. This young man, yeah. So you're sat there thinking, oh, this happens to only African Americans, We sit here and we go, nah, that has nothing to do with us. They don't care. They see all of us as a threat. All of us as a threat. And we all need to do what we need to do to make sure that we put an end to this. Whether it's educating ourselves, encouraging our white counterparts to educate themselves in regards to race matters across the globe. But this seems to be, at least, the way it's presented in the media, it seems to be something that's very, very prevalent in the United States. Yeah, it's here as well. I mean, you got countless stories of police brutality in the UK. I don't want to miss. I've got my laptop here, so there's I'll find you a story closer to home if you're in the UK. There we go. There's Joy Gardner. This happened in 1993, and the police raided her home, apparently to try to deport her, and she was murdered in police custody. So again, the United Kingdom isn't innocent in regards to police brutality and police killings of black people. And right now we talk about black people because we are disproportionately affected by this. So I want everybody, my listeners, the Proper Ugandan podcast, to please stay safe. Encourage your white counterparts to really, really educate themselves on what they can do, because one of the great things that they can do, and I'll bring solutions. I'll try to bring solutions, and I before I bring the solution, I think it's very important to stress that there's so many different ways to counter a particular problem. So many different ways. So if you feel tweeting, hashtagging, marching, Instagram living, that's the best thing that you can do. Absolutely, you're well within your right to do so. See, the solution I would say, another solution I would propose is that the white counterparts, if you can counter all this hate that's being presented to you or to your relatives, by your relatives, if you can counter that with truth and love and information that's based on fact, if you can somehow speak to your younger siblings, your younger nephews and nieces, your parents, if you are in a important and very high position of society, educate the people who work with you, or if you work in these big establishments, go and speak to them and tell them, look, you're white as well, and tell them you as a white person will not stand for white supremacy, that you will not be a protector of that you will not be a defender of that you are here to dismantle white supremacy as well. Because there's only so much we can say. So you have to go there and you have to tell them as well that, hey, Black Lives Matter. So you have to tell them as well. It's not just up to us. Because we know that. We know that. You have to also go and say, listen, you as a CEO of this company, you need to say something and do something. Okay? You got that racist aunt, uncle, grandparent, let them know that you won't stand for that. Because if they see that there is repercussions for their racism and their white supremacist way of thinking, then hopefully in many, many years to come, the system will be dismantled. But it takes all different sides from different angles, because they're always going to say that we're just angry black people, So don't just listen to our music, don't just watch our films, don't just wear our clothes. Okay? Come on. Stand up for us as well. Stand up for us. Don't just... I said you tweeting's okay, of course, but go beyond tweeting. Go beyond marching. When no one's watching. What conversations are you having with your siblings and your family? Okay? But yes, I'll end there. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Proper Ugandan podcast. I want to remind you once again that you can buy my book. It's not a book, it's a play. My play, Asata Taught Me. It's a very, very brilliant and relevant book, play about Asata Shakur. who was part of the Black Panthers, or who worked with the Black Panthers as well as the Black Liberation Army, and she found herself accused of murder, murdering a police officer or highway state trooper, and she was sentenced to life in prison, but she escaped and has been living in Cuba for the past 30 plus years. And I imagine a friendship between her and a young Cuban male who has dreams of living their American dreams. So please find it on Amazon, have a read of it. I reread little sections of it and it's as relevant as it was in 2016, unfortunately. So please do have a grab a copy of this if you're looking for some reading reading around these topics of police brutality and race relations in America. And also check out my debut album, Katugende, Katugende, and you can listen to that if you search Kalungi Fresh on YouTube Music, Apple Music, Spotify, and all the other good music stores. And remember to follow me on King_Kalungi, Instagram, as well as Twitter, Kalungi_, and follow this podcast's Instagram at Propa Podcast, Propa spelt PROPA podcast, and find the full YouTube recording of this podcast, or if you search the PropaUgandan podcast. And thank you. Remember as well, you can find the Twitter of this podcast at Propa Podcast. Social medias for this podcast is Propa Podcast, so just look for that and you'll find it. And once again, you can be the first to grab your own t-shirt, Kalunjem t-shirt, because we believe that to be royalty is to be above cool. So whenever they bring aggression, they bring stupidity, just be above cool and just Kalunjem. So you can find that by following at Kalungem Clothing on Instagram, KALUGEM Clothing, and you find a link to my Teespring where you'll be able to be the first to have a lovely golden white t-shirt, as you can see in the background if you're watching this. And if you can't, then please do follow that Instagram and get yourself a t-shirt. This is an incredible t-shirt that I wanted everybody to be able to see, so I hang it on the wall behind me so you can see all throughout. It's incredible. We got sizes from extra small all the way to extra large, and if you need extra small and or extra large, we will be happy to cater for you. So definitely check out the t-shirt Kalunjem, because we believe to be royalty is to be above cool. So when they bring violence and when they bring aggression, just remember Kalunjem. Thank you very much, and thank you for listening to a lovely episode of this very lovely educational episode of the Proper Ugandan podcast. Thank you very much, and see you soon.